Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Coffee Talk. This will be the first episode of a three-part series covering COVID-19's regulatory compliance, financial, and performance impacts on government contractors. I'm Dan Russert, Vice President of Marketing and Business Development at Jamis Software Corporation, covering for Steve Brander, our Vice President, who's out sick today. Thank you to everyone for attending today's presentation. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be here, and we hope you've got a nice hot cup of coffee ready for today's discussion. Today's presentation will be about 40 to 45 minutes long, and for those of you familiar with GoToWebinar, if you have questions, you can use the GoToWebinar side panel, and we'll do our best to get to your questions before the end of today's presentation. First of all, I'd like to introduce who we are at Jamis. For those of you who are not familiar with our company, our mission at Jamis is to help our customers solve many of their complex and dynamic business performance and regulatory compliance challenges with our modern business management software, Jamis Prime ERP, which is specifically designed for the unique needs of government contractors. Jamis is happy to support any and all learning content tailored to the government contracting industry, particularly now as we attempt to understand the rapidly changing environment impacted by the novel coronavirus pandemic. We feel the best thing we could do is to keep our customers, partners, and the industry in general informed during this time and assist in uncovering any proactive actions that contractors can take to help mitigate risk. And the best way for us to do that is to connect with our diverse partner network filled with experts across multiple disciplines within the federal contracting industry. Joining us for today's Coffee Talk is Craig Stetson, partner at Capital Edge Consulting. Craig has over 25 years of direct experience in government contract accounting, pricing, subcontract management, regulatory and federal contract compliance, business system implementation, and internal control oversight. His industry experience includes aerospace and defense, manufacturing, construction, architecture and engineering, information and communications, higher education, and not-for-profits. Craig actually began his career as an auditor for the Defense Contract Audit Agency, or the DCAA, and prior to joining Capital Edge, he was a director at PricewaterhouseCoopers, Baker Tilly, Virchow Krause, Navigant Consulting, and KPMG. I've known Craig for several years, and not only is he extremely knowledgeable and well-respected within the industry, but he's also a great guy as well. With that, I'll hand the reins over to Craig to begin today's presentation.
All right, thank you, Dan.
And there you are.
All right, thank you, Dan. Quite an introduction, a lot of pressure there. I'll just go with the good guy parts. The rest is subject to interpretation. But anyway, thank you to all who are participating, everybody working from home, enjoying your children and dogs, constant deliveries, etc. So anyway, we are here to talk about government contracting and the problems, challenges arising from COVID-19. Just a little bit real quickly about Capital Edge Consulting for those of you that are not aware. We're a national consulting firm dealing exclusively with government contract compliance matters. Our client base are all shapes and sizes, from the very big name brand government contractors to the middle market to the smaller contractors dealing with the federal government on both a prime and a subcontract level. And we deal, like I said, exclusively with government contract compliance type things that are unique when performing contracts with the government: cost accounting, cost allowability, cost allocation, business systems, so on and so forth. So just a quick introduction of who we are. So we're here today, part one of a three-part series that deals with COVID-19 and the effects potentially that you're going to see or feel under your government contracts. So today we're going to talk just a little bit about an overview of what's going on. This all started about 6 weeks ago. And what does that really mean on your existing contracts? I mean, we've broken this 3-part series down into 3 parts, as the name suggests. Part 1 today is going to talk about existing contracts. What do I do if I'm a contractor and I have contracts that I really have nothing to do with COVID-19 or national emergency? I make tanks or I make guns, and I'm impacted for various reasons. What does that mean to me? What are my actions or remedies, under these types of contracts due to the situation we're in? So that's today's session. Next week, or number 2, is going to deal with Section 3610 of the CARES Act. We're going to talk a little bit about that here in a few minutes. And then the third session is thinking more prospectively down the road. What do I do if I want to get new contracts? And by new contracts, we're going to focus on contracts associated with dealing with the national emergency. The government calls you up and says, I need, 1 million, whatever. What do you need to be aware of in that situation? Just, looking forward, because these contracts are a little bit different than your traditional contract. There's new statutory authorities, there's new rules, there's new everything out there. So as a contractor, you'd want to, I think, be aware of what maybe some of those consequences or challenges may be arising, from or applicable to a new contract. So that's part 3. So today we're going to look at existing contracts. We're going to then follow up with some summary and takeaway. This is really just kind of meant to set the framework here, if you will, regarding the situation that we're all in. So just some numbers here. This whole COVID-19 thing started in the beginning, middle of March. The CARES Act was passed about a month ago, actually a month ago yesterday, and that was a stimulus package. It's a little over $2 trillion. We're not going to get into the CARES Act, and there's multiple pieces to the thing. It was there as a means to support not just government contractors, but really multiple parties in general. Businesses directly, small businesses, large businesses, people. Some of you may have gotten your stimulus checks either in the mail or directly deposited. I mean, all of that was part of CARES Act. A lot of it, though, does apply or does trickle down or was earmarked for government contractors. And here's just a summary of some of the state and local and federal government dollars that are supposed to, were there to benefit for contractors in that situation. So a traditional government contract, okay, there's going to be a series of clauses in there that may be relevant. And I will be the first to say I am not a lawyer. Capital Edge Consulting is not a law firm. So if we get into, or if you get into situations where we want to look at clauses to determine from an entitlement perspective if this is something we can seek relief, by all means, seek advice of a trained professional, either in-house or external counsel that's familiar with government contracts. But generally speaking, there's going to be a couple of different types of clauses. There are clauses related to compensable delays. Compensable delays are delays that you may be compensated for, meaning the delay is not your fault, it was due to some other reason, and therefore you may be able to seek and receive compensation for the cost impacts associated with those delays. And the common ones are, these are all FAR Part 52 clauses, Federal Acquisition Regulation. Suspension of work, stop work, government delay of work. They all kind of say the same thing. The key difference there, or a key difference, is at least with the stop work notification, or under that clause, you're entitled to seek profit on top of your cost impact, where the other two, the suspension and the delay, deal with just an adjustment of cost only, not of price. But what those really say is the government, by written direction, is going to direct you to stop work, suspend your work, or delay the work for whatever reason, okay? So in that situation, the clause allows an adjustment or potential adjustment to the delivery schedule, the contract cost or price, or both. There's also constructive situations that arise where the government may not have directed you to do something, but things just do happen in government contracting. So there could be suspensions or delays caused by various reasons. various government actions or inactions that aren't formally written, but they do nonetheless affect or may affect your performance under the contract. So there is several situations where requests for reimbursement are appropriate in that situation as well. So compensable delays, number one. Excusable delay. That means I was delayed, but I have an excuse. It may not be compensable, but the government will provide you with relief on schedule. So if something was supposed to take 100 days, you may get, an additional 20 days, for example, to perform and deliver. It's a excusable delay, and a lot of that is in the termination for default clauses, where if something isn't going right, you're not able to deliver under the terms of the contract, the government, under the termination for default clause, can terminate you for default. And that normally is a bad thing. You want to avoid that for several reasons. However, if you're able to show cause and be able to provide, reasons, I was not able to perform under the terms of the contract because of whatever, the government can allow that, and it's an excusable delay. Commercial contracts, for the most part, all of that stuff we just talked about, the compensable delays, excusable delays, those types of clauses generally are not going to be in a commercial contract. What is going to be in there is the commercial contract clause, 52.212-4, which is a very long clause, has a lot of different provisions, some of which deal with, these extreme type situations that we're in right now, epidemics, quarantine restrictions, etc., that may provide relief or at least excusable delays in the performance of the contract. So those are the two main buckets. There's a third grouping over here, various changes clauses. So this is very common in government contracting. The government has the right to change. You're awarded the base contract, and then the government says, well, I want to change, the color of the room from red to blue. I just want to. So here's a change order directing you to change the scope of work from red to blue. Well, blue costs more. So if that's the case, or it takes longer, then you're typically entitled to an equitable adjustment to recover those increased costs. So there's changes. And there's a different clause for the different type of contract, fixed price, cost reimbursement, or time and material. So compensable delays, excusable delays, and then just changes. Changes a broad general area of relief where contractors can seek, adjustments. Request for equitable adjustments, or REAs is the term. So the CARES Act, that is not a standard clause for a few reasons. One, the CARES Act was only invented or created a month ago, and whether contracts are ultimately modified to invoke or to incorporate certain aspects of the CARES Act is something that is still to be determined. We'll talk more about Section 3610 a week from today. That is a small portion of the CARES Act. It's a paragraph long, perhaps a half a page in text or narrative, that allows or provides contractors the ability to request reimbursement for certain costs arising directly from COVID-19. So we'll talk more about that in a week, but that is, again, another opportunity to seek damages or reimbursement, for increased costs, not anticipated, obviously, during the performance of the contract, but arising from the COVID-19 situation. So that's just some general framework as to what your contracts may include that allows contractors to seek various remedies or reimbursement of cost, either through the prime or directly with the government if you have a prime contract. So this all started, there has been a lot of formal communication, either formal directives, instructions, or just guidance memorandums that have been issued by the various commands. Most of it's been the Department of Defense. So we're going to talk today about some of the DoD memos that have come out dealing exclusively with, or specifically with, the effects of COVID-19 and how the government and contractors may want to deal with this. So obviously, if I'm a contractor and I can't perform, my employees can't show up because the site is closed, or there are, state or local shelter in place, stay at home, don't leave the house kind of restrictions. Obviously, that may impact your ability to perform on a contract. Same thing with your supply chain. Subcontractors or vendors may have the same challenges. That all then flows up to you as the prime. So there's several things going on that could impact performance. So that's the contractor side of it. The government side of it is they're saying, wow, I still need to get my goods or services that that I've contracted for. I still need my weapons. I still need, whatever it is that I've contracted for. So I'm at risk here too. So it's probably in my best interest, this is the government talking now, to work with contractors to help get through this situation, not only for the contractor's benefit, but for my own as well, because I still have a need for these supplies, these goods and services that I've contracted for. So it's a mutually beneficial thing that the government, at least the DoD, has recognized up front. And this is just based on these memos and correspondence that we've seen. It is really too early. This has only been going on for a little over a month. So to see in real life how all this works and what happens is to be determined, because it's brand new. But at least the communication that has been publicly released is encouraging, at least from the DoD's point of view. So DPAP, Defense Procurement and Acquisition Policy, is what that stands for. So these are DoD correspondence. This was issued a month and a half ago. And this is a quote right out of this memo. And these memos were issued out to the contracting commands within DoD. Strongly encouraged to engage with government contractors, okay? Taken to ensure the welfare and society of the total force, et cetera. So the message there is, we are here. We're going to work together to get through this. We are going to support you, contractor, because it is in both of ours best interest. All right. Third bullet, communication between government contractors. And we'll talk about this a little bit later. This is huge. Contractors, we cannot stress this enough, that if situations are arising or they are anticipated to arise that are going to negatively affect performance, successful performance under the contract, you need to get on the phone, email, whatever the case may be, and communicate with your customer, either your prime contractor or government, to explain what is going on, what mitigation plans we may have in place, what we want to do to be able to continue to support you. Communication is huge and cannot be under stressed. Navy memo saying a similar thing was issued a week later. My intent, remove barriers, again, a quotation, to maximize efficient execution, all right? Specific activities were mentioned in this memo, okay? Payment of requesting REAs. So the next couple of communications we're going to go through deal with improving cash flow to contractors, because times are tough. The primary way to keep contractors in business and keep them in business so they can continue to supply the government with their goods or services is money. It's cash. So to improve cash flow the maximum extent we can obviously affects everything. Payment of existing REAs. So an REA is, I mentioned earlier, request for recoverable adjustment. That's where a proposal has been submitted to the government requesting reimbursement of X number of dollars. And a lot of times those do not get settled and paid quickly. Well, at least in the Navy's eyes, we need to get those settled as soon as we can, get that money, get that cash flow over to the contractor. Reduction in retentions and withholds. Retentions and withholds are a common contract thing. The government withholds X% of the money due you as the contractor, just to protect their interest until you successfully deliver and they accept the widget that you're selling. So reduction of withholds. Accelerated award of contracts under the UCAs, where the maximum funding is now going to be increased. So again, all three of those deal with getting money into your hands, contractors' hands, quicker. Progress payment rates. For contractors that deal with fixed price contracts, a payment mechanism frequently is progress payments, where you're paid based on as a percentage of cost. of the fixed price. And there's a thing called a liquidation rate. That's just another fancy term for the government withholding a certain percent of your incurred cost pending delivery and acceptance of the good or the product. So the government now has raised those rates, 90% for large business and 95% for small. So that's just a cash flow thing where when you submit these requests for progress payments, the money is coming in quicker than it did before. And that's, for the moment, a DoD thing only. I've not seen anything that would suggest that the progress payment rates have changed for other than defense contracts. So this is a good one. This is a more complete messaging, if you like, memo that came out the end of March from DoD, where we must work hand in hand to recover. Okay, so this is what I've been saying from the beginning. The government is making an attempt to work with, to offer flexibilities in certain contracting arrangements to be able to get money to contractors. All right. It goes on to note that there are various FAR clauses that may provide relief. We talked about what the common ones are in the beginning of this presentation. REAs, case-by-case basis, okay? So the government is maybe not advocating, but I mean, they're just making everyone aware that there are opportunities, contractual mechanisms, the REAs to be submitted to be able to recover or at least request reimbursement for negative adverse cost impacts arising from the situation we're in. And then this is where the CARES Act, specifically Section 3610, is referenced. So the CARES Act was, I believe, signed March 27th. So a few days later, March 30th, by date of this memo, the Section 3610 is specifically referenced in there as a new mechanism that contractors may use to seek reimbursement for certain types of cost arising out of COVID-19. Again, we're going to talk about 3610 next week. Vouchers, that's a term related to cost reimbursement contracts. So if we have classified contracts and you're submitting vouchers, typically the DCAA is going to look at those first. That has now they've been cut out of the picture, and contractors are instructed to submit these vouchers, these requests for payments under your classified contracts directly to the paying office, again, with the idea that will shorten the time frame that it takes for contractors to get the cash. So another attempt by the government to improve cash flow. We've already looked at, I think, three or four different things the government are doing to shorten or to improve the cash flow, shorten the time it takes from request of payment to actually receiving payments, all with the attempt or the objective of assisting contractors with their financial challenges that are arising out of this environment that we're in. A little bit about the 3610, Section 3610. This is a provision or a portion right out of that half of a page, the paragraph of the actual 3610 language that deals with credits. The government's not going to let you double dip. So if they're going to pay you for something under 3610 and there's a subsequent credit downstream that you're allowed to recover, because of, usually these are tax credits. So you may have an opportunity to receive a tax credit because you did something. And if that something is otherwise paid for under 3610, you can't receive it twice. So there's a provision here that says your 3610 reimbursement needs to be offset by these credits. This is all very vague. This is to be determined, and we will talk more about that later next week. When I say to be determined, it's the actual mechanics and how it's going to be implemented and what the accounting is going to be. That was all very undefined when the politicians wrote this section. So we'll talk more about that later. Specifically related, again, 3610, there's been 5 or 6 new memos that have been released recently. Again, we'll talk more about that next week. Dan, do you have a question?
Sure. Yeah, I see we've got a few here. Let me start. Is it possible for government contracts to contain clauses allowing recovery for impacts due to COVID-19?
And the answer is yes. Current contracts typically will have several clauses that may be applicable. Existing contracts may actually be subject to modification under the current environment to bring in new clauses that otherwise didn't exist. So there are multiple avenues for contractors to seek some kind of relief, either compensual or not. It does exist, so something certainly to be aware of.
All right.
So we talked about general contractual arrangements, remedies. We talked about the communication being issued by the Department of Defense. I've focused here on DoD, but Department of Energy and NASA has also issued guidance, albeit limited, and they tend to generally mirror what the DoD has said. So there is a lot of correspondence out there. The DoD normally, takes the lead or the precedence in that. So it is there. Certainly something you want to be aware of, because that will then should enhance your ability to, present your case to the government. The government knows there's a problem, so to be proactive, you want to be able to be aware of what your opportunities are to seek relief. So along those lines, there are 5 things that are important, very important. Contractor diligence and risk mitigation. So just generally, when you're dealing with the government, there are certain things that prudent contractors, sophisticated contractors do. It really revolves around documentation, communication, some cost accounting requirements to be able to support your position that you're claiming with the government. So in this situation, we want to look at 5 things: program management and oversight, documentation, discrete cost accounting, okay, communication, and then supply chain management. Some of these, 2 or 3 of these, are directly, specifically addressed in some of these DoD memos and communication that we've been talking about, and some of the Section 3610 guidance that has come out more so in the last few weeks. It gets into much more detail in some of these regarding some of these requirements here. So we cannot focus on this enough. This is a big deal. So program management, all right? Obviously, if we believe there's going to be challenges, we need a program guy to be able to communicate with management how the program is going, where the challenges may arise and why, all right? So existing or anticipated supply chain. We need to know if we're going to have problems with our suppliers. I mean, we're starting to see a little bit of that from primes, clients, where certain things that they're buying from vendors, subcontractors, the supply chain, may be in jeopardy because of, various things that, would not have occurred but for the situation that everybody's in. So we need to know what's going on in the supply chain. Is it a critical part? What happens to me, the prime, if I don't get that part? Do I have a backup plan, etc.? And possibility of performance. Okay, so lately, the last month or so, 90%? I mean, it's a big number of the country is kind of in some form of shutdown, lockdown, can't go to work, got to work remotely. Obviously, that has an impact. If you can't access the facility, your own office or a government facility, a base, for example, things like that, that's going to impact. Access to government personnel, DCAA and DCMA, for example. Not that you really need access to them to do your job, but they're not in the offices either right now. So there's, a government-wide reduction in their own personnel that are available or not available that you would need access to be able to do the job. So there's a lot of things within the program that really need to be aware of to be able to assess and make a determination as to, what challenges am I going to have, and do I need to get on the phone with my customer to start to communicate? disruptions or how it may impact performance of the contract. All right, we have a second question.
Yes, I have one here. Has the government implemented any recent initiatives to assist contractors with relief for contract performance or cost issues?
Yes, they have. There are things, contract revisions to, like I've said, to increase the receipt of cash, progress payments, the vouchers under your classified contracts. There are new programs, I'll call them programs, that's probably not the right word, but there's new statutory authorities that the government has to be able to invoke new mechanisms, new contractual obligations that allow contractors to seek relief. So yes, the government is being somewhat progressive in initiating or implementing new initiatives to help contractors deal with the financial burdens that they're facing because of this situation. So program management, okay, we want to have a good picture on really where the program is going. So to be able to do that, we would suggest perhaps periodic or frequent communication between the program management personnel and management, and then certainly any discussion with the government as required or as considered necessary to be able to keep things on track as much as we can. Documentation, a big deal. Always a big deal in government contracting, but here even more so. Some of the questions and answers and the guidance we did not specifically talk about today, but we will next week, deals with documentation. And the government goes into a lot of detail as to what needs to be documented and what the contractor needs to do to be able to present to the government a compelling argument that they are actually entitled and should receive some form of reimbursement. This all deals with this new section 3610. So documentation, okay? Specific reasons and dates of events, okay? We got to go back and kind of build the story. For example, we do construction. I'm just making stuff up here, all right? So things never go like they're supposed to in a construction project, right? Things change. So generally, or a lot of times what happens is contractors keep, a daily log as to what happened, who was on site, what went wrong, what the challenges were, et cetera. So we would want to have basically a story, a timeline of specific discrete events, what happened and why, and how were we impacted. Attempts to mitigate, how am I going to get around this? Is it critical path or not? Or do I have a backup plan, an alternative to work around? That doesn't mean it's free. I mean, if you're delayed or if you're disrupted for whatever reason and you have a workaround, well, so a lot of times that workaround is maybe redundant or it's out of scope, or it costs more, it takes more time, et cetera. So we'd want to be able to identify what those alternatives or those workarounds are and capture the cost or the time accordingly. Communication. Communication is a big thing, okay? We do not want to go on for 6 months and then all of a sudden you prepare an REA and it shows up in the contracting officer's desk and that's the first they've heard of it. How do you think that's going to end? Probably not well. Versus communication up front in month 1, for example, that says, look, here's the problems, the challenges we're facing, and here's why. Here's what we're doing to try to mitigate and get around this. But be aware that we may be seeking some relief for some out of scope type activities here. So communication is always better, normally on the front end and frequently or periodically. And then notification to the government. You want to preserve your rights. Okay, so actually notify the government that, look, here's what's going on. We may be seeking relief through a request for equitable adjustment. We reserve our rights under the contract, da-da-da-da-da. So at least then there's a formal communication trail and documentation out there to be able to demonstrate when it comes time to, hopefully not argue about it, but at least to be able to demonstrate, hey, we were diligent, we were proactive, we told you everything that was going on. So that helps the contractor's case immensely downstream when it's time to settle and negotiate the cost. Discrete cost accumulation So this is an accounting discussion, a job cost accounting discussion. This is another specific item that is discussed in detail in one of these questions and answers and memos released by the DoD. So when things happen and you're seeking reimbursement for those things, they need to be captured or segregated within your accounting system. They need to be discretely captured. So if, for example, your employees cannot show up for work, okay, they just simply can't, there should be a charge number set up to discretely capture the time and expense associated with that event, rather than just having them continue to charge and have it commingled with everything else that they charge. Not just time, but anything, any kind of a discrete event that would not have occurred but for the situation. So we want to set up and separately capture the cost associated with these events. That's what's meant by the discrete capture. Okay? And actually, that is a specific requirement. It's not just simply a recommendation. It is a requirement when we're seeking relief under 3610 for certain types of labor costs. They need to be separately, discretely captured in the accounting system. Okay? Not mixed in with something else, but just by its own thing. So there needs to be sophistication within the accounting system and the job cost system to be able to set things up so that these costs can be easily identified, segregated, and then presented to the government. But then more importantly, a couple of years down the road, potentially when the government shows up to do an audit, you can say, here it is, right here in my accounting system. So discrete accounting. Communication and notice. We talked a little bit about that. Very important. You want to be able to build this communication stream, and that can be done under various means: emails, letters, meetings, etc. We want to have a trail of all that, especially considering that a lot of times things do not get settled quickly, even though they should today, because that's the government's intent, but they may not always. Government may disagree or want to dispute something. You need to have a paper trail of this communication, because what happens frequently, periodically, is people leave on both the government and the contractor side. Things get lost, systems get changed. Okay, so that trail becomes a little sketchy sometimes. So to just avoid that, we want to document from the earliest point forward all the communication, who said what we may have agreed to or not, what the next steps are, etc., just to build a complete trail regarding the matter. All right, communication and notice. Supply chain. All right. Obviously, if you have a supplier that's providing a critical component that you need to include in your ultimate product that's being sold to the government, that could be a big deal. So what do we do with our subs? Remember, the subs are going to come to you, the prime, for any type of damages, and then that just gets included in the primes and forwarded on to the government. So the relief at the subcontractor level is the prime contractor. So there needs to be diligent, subcontract management processes or controls in place between or at the prime level to deal with the sub. So we want to be as proactive as we can with the sub. If there's any problems there, we want to know about it early so that we can react accordingly. Develop a mitigation plan, for example. That's another thing the government's going to be looking for is, all right, you've got this challenge, you've got this problem. What are you doing to try to get around it? What are you trying to do to mitigate? All right, what's your alternatives? So there needs to be a forward-looking, progressive kind of, or forward-looking, proactive is the word I'm looking for, approach to this. All right, yeah, we know we have a problem, but we have different scenarios in place to be able to deal with it. The government's going to be looking for that kind of description. It cannot simply just be, well, can't do it. Well, all right, but be a little creative and come up with some options as to how you might be able to mitigate it and still deliver. So we would expect the same thing with the supply chain. And that really depends too on how intensive is the supply chain compared to the total activity that you, the prime, are required If the majority of the effort is subcontracted out, then this becomes a bigger deal, obviously. But something certainly to be aware of as part of the overall program management. So I know we're running to the end of our time. So what does all this mean? Understanding a contract terms, conditions, rights, all right? That's what we talked about in the beginning. We want to know what's in the contract. So you've heard the term read the contract. If you haven't, read the contract. You'd want to know really what are my options here, or my abilities to seek either compensation or not. Maybe it's just schedule relief. Maybe I don't need money. I just need an extension of schedule. Okay, read the contract. So section I is where your clauses are. Section H typically is going to be special provisions, things that might be unique in your contract. So read the contract, know what the rights and obligations are of each party. Awareness of the government directions and guidance. Everything that I've mentioned here is publicly available. It's out there. If you don't know where to get it, you can contact me. I can point you in the right direction. I have some of these, or all these memos actually. So the point is public information that's out there. You should know really what the government is saying, what the message is from the top. Don't rely on the government, either the DCA auditor or even your contracting officer to tell you all this. You should be proactive and know what's out there, just to put yourself in a better position to deal with the government. Early and frequent communication. Obviously, my example, we don't want to wait till the very end and just an REA shows up. We want to have discussions right from the very beginning to aid in or increase the chance of a successful outcome. Accounting. So cost data needs to be the hours, the time, the dollars. All of that needs to be separately calculated and accumulated. Written documentation. Got to have it. All right. Transparency. That goes with the communication. It goes with the documentation. Government contracting over the last several years has kind of switched back to the way it used to be. So now it's a very transparent environment we're dealing in, and much more so in situations like this, where we have these emergency, situations that we're in. We'll talk more about that in week 3. Transparency. All right. The government is going to want us exactly where and how they spent this $2 trillion. So transparency. All right. I think you have another question, Dan.
There was one around documentation that you were able to pretty directly answer earlier. There's another here. Is the setup of the new COVID labor rules something to be tracked separately?
Yes. I assume you're talking about the idle time under Section 3610, which is next week's discussion. But yes, documentation for sure, specifically included in the government's expectations. So when an REA shows up under 3610 for, paid time off for certain employees that you have to maintain to be able to be ready to go when you can, the government is going to be looking for, separate accounting for sure, along with a bunch of other things. So it's a rather extensive request. Okay. So yes, the answer is yes. Documentation.
Okay, and several people asked about. Oh, go ahead, Craig.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say several people asked about the slides for today's presentation. That is available in the handout section of the GoToWebinar side panel, and we'll be following up after this presentation with a copy of those slides and a recording of the presentation today as well, just for everybody's information.
Right.
And Craig, you can go.
Yeah. So I think this is it as far as formal material. We go back up here. Where is it?
Oh, you want to show your slide here?
My picture, first slide. There we go.
All right. I passed it back to you there.
There.
Gotta show.
So I'm approachable. If you want to email me or call, you can. You'll see that, obviously, if you download the slides. So if you have questions, that's fine. Let me know. And I think that's it, unless...
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Craig. Appreciate your time today. Hope everyone found this session to be informative. And don't forget, we have 2 more pieces of this series starting next week, Tuesday, May 5th at 11 a.m. Eastern. We'll be talking about CARES Act Section 310 and what contractors need to know specifically. And then the following Tuesday, we'll be covering prospective government contracts. So be sure to tune in next Tuesday. And in the meantime, if anybody has questions, feel free to reach out to us directly. And Craig also provided his information. You can find that within the slide deck as well. But thank you all for attending today, and we hope you have a great day.
Thank you.